I heard you last night. I heard you last night. You wanted me to be your butch. You've fancied me, some stone butch that's supposed to go redeem you. And not only am I a stone butch, I'm also at least masculine enough to appeal to your homonormativity, I think is what it is. We've kind of transcended. We're supposed to be in some other realm where we're trying to undo the scourge that's been put upon clandestine same sex relations. I'm absolutely serious. Am I bitch enough? How's my face look? I think this light is good. It's good. You don't have as much of the toad. You don't want that, do you? Sometimes I do things and I piss people off. And it's fine with me because I piss people off. They piss me off all the time, right? And I wrote this article. Why did I write this article? Does anybody remember why I wrote that article? I got a Facebook post when I was allowed to have Facebook. It was a man who had formerly run for mayor in another city. And I had some contestation with him, but overall I supported his campaign. I think he might potentially have made a fine mayor. And he sent out this Facebook post, and it was like a cry. I saw it on Facebook, but I heard him cry. I heard him scream before I saw the Facebook post. And something happened to me. And I just got inspired. So I started writing. Now, I actually saw the Facebook post. I actually saw him put that out there. I believe I heard in another level, I heard him scream. It was also around the time frame during which there was an execution in another country. A lot of executions in another country. So I wrote this article. And after I wrote the article, I didn't get it published immediately. Some other things happened. And so I had to amend the article because later on, after I'd written the article, two indigenous leaders in another country got murdered. And the first one was not as popular in the United States. He was from a particular political party that we don't often acknowledge as having indigenous leadership in the United States. The other person was acknowledged as being an indigenous leader and was from an opposition party and was a critic of an energy project in Honduras. Now, I used some language that might have been considered incendiary. And what nobody's ever told me is that they will take your articles that you publish and they'll hook up some kind of security paradigm. Not as in just internet security or cyber security or connected to national security. I'm talking about as in finance. And it's like they create scenarios based on archetypes that they identify with via the presentation in the article and or actual individuals that you've talked about. They'll create rationales based on the expose of the crimes or of the deeds that are printed in these articles. And if you go after the right person, and they have enough leverage, including in your personal life and access to your actual human and political capital, they'll make it really ceremonial. And at some point, somebody decided that they were going to get very literal about using my life as a proxy for trying to get Hillary Clinton cleared of a variety of charges. At the time I wrote this article, I did not know that there were charges pending against Hillary Clinton. I did not know this. I know that I had been doing my own efforts and investigation concerning the fact that I'd recently been in Honduras and there were all kinds of outstanding questions from the time frame during which she was Secretary of State. And the coup in Honduras had a very profound implication. I was very forthright and honest with everybody about that. But what also was happening at that time is that in addition to trying to provide solidarity to people in Honduras who were discussing their situation, which was in conjunction with two different groups of people from leadership paradigms in countries south of the US-Mexico border that were saying directly and independently of each other, if you really want to help us, America has to deal with its consumption problem. You have to deal with your domestic consumption of drugs. Talking about decriminalization and talking about these things, they may have a political utility for you, but this is not responding to our real needs. You can't really be sincere and talk about doing cross-border organizing or solidarity work until America addresses its appetite for drugs. That's what gets us killed. And in this paradigm, part of the justification for the murders and part of what the United States wanted to focus on had to do with energy. So I said, hey, why don't we investigate if there are any projects domestically in the United States since the time that Hillary Clinton became Secretary of State, specifically related to so-called green energy or renewable energy, including windmills or wind energy, including solar energy, and including hydroelectric energy, that may or may not have a direct connection with interests associated with the Clintons, independent of their government role, that may or may not have been involved in fraud concerning their time in office, either Bill's as president or governor of Arkansas, or Hillary Clinton's as either First Lady or Secretary of State, or when she was a senator. And I specifically referenced it in connection with, while as Secretary of State, did she abuse her office as Secretary of State in order to set up possibilities for engaging in green or renewable energy projects in other countries that the State Department had vested interest in, that may be reflected in domestic energy projects that her or her organization or others that are independently or personally connected to her would have benefited from. And this may show a pattern of collusion or a pattern of political corruption comparable to what the people in these other countries are saying they're experiencing with their domestic paradigm. This was before that article was published that I started doing this. Well, I got cut off. They blacklisted me. They wouldn't post me. They kept coming up with this excuse. Well, we're a 501c3 and you can't do anything to campaign during an election season. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not talking about her as a presidential candidate. I'm talking about her as Secretary of State. Are you saying the entirety of her political record is off limits? You can't even say it was just about people interfering in the listserv, because I met with somebody in person from that group, and then their excuse was, are you on your medication? I bring this up because I might have said some things that were incendiary. I call some people some names. I reference organized crime and call it certain names. I just want to read something. I found this just today. I'm going to read it directly. 6 years later, with the publication of Other People's Money, Brandeis provided a critique of large organizations and their command of modern financial life that inspired at least 2 generations of progressives. Other People's Money detailed the workings of a modern financial system in which bankers occupied new positions of privilege and power. They served on boards of directors and protective committees and played managerial roles in corporate reorganizations. By exploiting the organizational instruments of modern corporate finance, voting trusts, interlocking directorates, joint ownership, bankers acquired control of large business enterprises and established themselves as a new, quote, financial oligarchy, end quote. From Brandeis's standpoint, the bankers' concentration of economic power in and of itself constituted a dangerous locus of power that threatened democratic values. But he also took pains to document how investment bankers failed to use their authority wisely or equitably. By exercising their control over the supply of capital, bankers manipulated stock and bond prices and stifled economic competition. In addition, they profiteered by charging exorbitant sums for underwriting and other services. Far from supplying capital as the engine of innovation, they frequently impeded the development of new technologies. To add insult to injury, the bankers did not even have to use their own money to amass enormous profits at the expense of investors. Instead, they enjoyed, quote, the privilege of taking the golden eggs laid by somebody else's goose, end quote. Although investors enjoyed ownership rights in theory, their isolation, atomization, and lack of access to information rendered them helpless to exert any meaningful control over their economic fates. Into this power vacuum stepped the bankers. Brandeis indignantly observed, quote, they control the people through the people's own money, End quote. This is from an article called Neo-Brandeisianism and the New Deal. It's written by Jessica Wang. I understand it was published a few years ago. A period this refers to is the 1930s. We're not so far away from the centennial of when many of these events were written. Did you have a fucking problem with me calling it an oligarchy?